My name is Bill Walton. I'm an associate professor in the School of Fisheries, Aquaculture, and Aquatic Sciences at Auburn University and an extension specialist in Alabama Cooperative Extension. Shellfish Lab was built back in 2003, and the idea was that Auburn wanted to make an investment here on the coast for the commercial fishermen, the resource managers, folks who are interested in the shellfish resources here on the coast. We call this off-bottom oyster farming, and so this is where you're taking oysters from a place like a hatchery seed we call them, and you're putting them in some type of basket or bag, and you're raising them. And so back in 2009, we had some folks interested in it, but nobody had started a farm. So we started working with one of the folks out here over in Grand Bay.
Hey Steve, nice day. We did. Jason Wilson.
Farmers came from different angles, but Steve and Dima get credit for being the first ones to take the leap and go for it. Then it took a couple years. We just had to deal with, one, we had to work out how do you do it and make money at it. We had to figure out some of the problems with that. And then we had to work through with the resource agencies, we had to work through the permitting. And now we've got 7 commercial farms in operation in Alabama right now. We have several more applications pending. We're always trying to work on ways to grow a better oyster. There are techniques that the farmer can use when they get the oyster seed from the hatchery. They're pretty much all getting the same stuff. But then where they grow them, so where their farm is, will affect how the oysters grow.
In the early 1900s, on the end of this point here, their 2 oystermen got in an argument over their oysters because they had leases, and so it was private oyster beds. And one ended up shooting the other over the oysters, and that's how it got the name Murder Point.
Oysters, unlike a lot of other farmed seafood, oysters are eating the food that's in the water, the phytoplankton we call it, the microscopic algae in the water. And so the thing that impacts oysters the most is where they're grown. They take on the flavor very much of where they're grown. So we have these, right now we have these 7 farms in Alabama. And some of them, like one's up in Grand Bay, another one's down off of Dauphin Island, and then we have a number up in Portersville Bay. Believe it or not, those farms, just because they're in 3 different areas, those oysters taste substantially different. I mean, I've served them at raw bars, and people always tell me that these oysters, not only they taste different, but everyone's got a favorite. And what I love is by the end of the night, I'll have every oyster that I'm serving, somebody will have told me that, oh, that's obviously the best oyster. And I love that, because it's not that there's one oyster that everybody says is the best, but everybody has a favorite.
Good and salty? Oh yeah, good and salty and nice and chewy too. You know, not very, you don't get the, you know, sometimes you get those slimy kind of runny ones. You know, that one got some texture to it. Heck yeah.
Some of the things that farmers can do is they choose things like what kind of gear they're going to grow their oysters in. There are different types. Some are in baskets on lines, some are in bags, in cages that float near the water's surface. But then you have things like how much you handle them, and that sounds silly, but an oyster, if you just let it grow, might grow long and skinny. And it'd be a big oyster, but it won't be that sort of beautiful, fantastic oyster that you're looking for. And one way that you do that is you bring the oyster in and you run it through a tumbler, or you give it a lot of shaking, and that'll break off those edges and it'll give you a deeper cupped oyster that looks a lot nicer. To make money at an oyster farm, you've got to be the person who's out there in the water handling your oysters. You'll hire help. You're going to need help, but you're going to be one of the people that's out there working those oysters. There's just no way around that. So what we found is we get people who think they're going to do big numbers, and then they start, and then they realize how much time it takes to do that, and so then they'll often scale back. And that's good, because then I'll see when they do that, their quality will often go up, because they're spending more time in getting it right.
There we go. Thank you, sir.
Oh yeah.
One of the neat parts of the story of getting oyster farming going here in Alabama and the Gulf is that we've got a traditional oyster industry out here. We've got folks who tong oysters, so they're going out on public reefs and that's fishing for oysters, tonging for oysters. And then we've got private oyster beds where people have private grounds that they put shell down on, and then they rely on Mother Nature to provide the oysters, and they go harvest them. What I like about what we've done with the off-bottom oyster farming is we've had folks interested in it, and it's producing another product. So far, this hasn't been viewed as competition with what's going on in the wild, because those oysters that you get off the reef, those are getting tonged up and they're going to shucking houses, and they're gonna and there are people who are going to make a living doing that. These oyster farmers are now producing an oyster that's really intended to go to the to very nice restaurants, premium raw bars.
Once you explain things to people like that and they understand, look, we use all malted barley, hops, yeast. We use no adjuncts, no preservatives. We don't pasteurize our beer so it lasts longer on the shelf. You know, all that stuff that the big boys do. I mean, we're still a bunch of guys in there ripping open 50-pound bags of malted barley and dumping it in a mill, 2,000 pounds at a time, twice a day. You know, I mean, when people realize that, they can appreciate the price point on it, and you know, they try the product and they get it. You know, once they know the story, and it's the same thing with oyster growers, man. Once you taste it and you hear their story and you see what they're putting into it, it's easy to pay that extra few bucks a dozen to know where your money's going.
So the tag's got some information about where they came from and date and time of harvest. And that tag stays with the oysters so that you go to a restaurant, you can ask them, when and where did this product come from? And what is it? Did it come off the reef, or was it farm raised?
To me, I think one of the things I'm proud of with Auburn School of Fisheries is that we work with individuals to get things done. You know, we work on solutions. And here on the coast, I think that, you know, one of the things that we've been on the coast and we're going to stay on the coast because we want to work with people to solve problems.
This run we're on, this is Bryan High School's training.
Really?
And so what we're doing here, we're trying to train a labor force for these farmers.
Sure.
Also, it's to get the young people to go home to their parents and be like, Mom, Dad, I'm doing this oyster training and it's just awesome.
Right.
And to try to get the family involved.
Absolutely.
And, get the parents interested to where if they are local fishermen that you know, they want their child to stay fishing, but they don't want them in the shrimping industry because they know the shrimping industry is falling apart and stuff.
Right.
That they may be willing to invest to help get their child started in something like this. So
the South has this reputation of, you know, it's a place that we have a lot of oysters, but we haven't done off-bottom oyster farming. And so, you know, why is that? And it turns out that we faced a lot of the same biological challenges. We get hurricanes.
So we lost about 50 or 60,000 in Katrina.
Wow.
But then, so we laid low for a few years and went back to building the house. Yeah, all these houses out here they're about 8 feet in the ground.
Really?
Those are 45.
Really?
Yeah.
So it'll hang on.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to stay out here.
Yeah, we're not going to stick around to find out.
I've been to some amazing raw bars and I've had some fantastic oysters, and the oysters that are being grown here are as good or as better than anything I've had anywhere else. And so I just think it's this new wave coming of this southern handcrafted oyster, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that.
You know, you see all these things that are very distinctly southern that, you know, have shown up other places under other flags or other banners. You know, like I was in Chicago a few months ago and there's a meat and three opening, and it was like the biggest thing in town, and everybody thought it was like this great concept of a meat and three vegetables for $8 to go. And I just kind of laughed about it because there's so much stuff that you talk about entrepreneurs, man. Southerners have been doing entrepreneurship for a long time. You know, Southerners have been, you talk about sustainability. I mean, Southerners, people in Alabama have been living by sustainable practices for a long time. I mean, if you don't take care of your farm, your whole family starves to death. That's about as sustainable as it gets, you know.
Whether it's working with somebody to start an oyster farm that they didn't have before, or whether it's a question that we get, somebody calls from Mississippi because they have a question about what's happening on their oyster beds. I love trying to get the answers to those questions. And my favorite is when I don't know the answers to those questions, and so then I work with that person to figure out how we're going to do the research, the study together to figure out the answer for that. That's my favorite part of the job. That and being on the water all the time.
That's no problem. We can walk over there.
Yeah.
Get your boots on.
Right.